Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fatal Knockout development log. This one's a bit special because it's based off the fact that we finally have physical review copies for Fatal Knockout, which is great. It isn't going to be the exact final version, but in terms of the gameplay and how it looks, very happy with it. But stuff like additional playtesting, reviewer feedback, because these will be sent out to reviewers, and also any stretch goals which are unlocked from the Kickstarter, which is going to be in March. Will obviously affect and change the game. So even though this is quite representative of what the game's going to be like, do not assume that this will be the exact final version of the product. So I wanted to show off the prototype. Obviously, incredibly excited for it. It's going to be all over socials and everything like that. So there wasn't really a massive need to make a video specifically about it. So what I thought I'd do is I would use this in order to sort of go through the history of Fatal Knockout, look through all the old prototypes, and to see how much the game has changed from the very first idea which I had when I was delivering pizzas at a time for a pizza shop. And whilst I was driving, I was just like, well, I'd been playing Smash Bros and Tekken. I was just like, I couldn't think of a board game which perfectly represented and felt like those video games, especially when going back to like Street Fighter 2 in the arcades and stuff like that. So that was sort of the idea. But I've got Tabletop Simulator up, and I think it would be great to sort of go through some of the old prototypes and talk about like what's changed and what were the initial ideas. Right, okay, so on Tabletop Simulator is just great at archiving every single version of a game you've worked on, so long as you obviously save it. And this is the first saved version of Fatal Knockout. Now, initially, all the cards looked the card backs were exactly the same because they were all printed from the same deck. That's just the way Tabletop Simulator works. So the reason why we got these pawns here, which don't exist in the actual game, is because when a card was played initially face down, that was always the case. You stick your pawn in it so you know which one's which. So yeah, this was obviously incredibly cobbled together. As anybody knows with Tabletop Simulator, it's very easy to change a card back. It's just I literally just used how the decks look as the card back for it. Like you can see here, all the individual cards on it. So that's one of the first immediate things which I noticed that were different. But then when I was pulling a card out from the deck, as you can see here, there are 55 cards. There are 55 cards in the deck, and that's because a lot of these cards are copy and pasted. Like, for example, there's multiple of like certain cards. So like you could even have a hand which are like just all the same card, like 5 shields, for example. And the reason why I wanted to do this initially is just to sort of increase variability, like different combinations of hands and stuff like that. But I got a lot of inspiration in terms of the combat systems in this game from another game called Sinjitsu. Good friends with the designer on that, and I was part of an early playtest for it, and it was just so elegant. However, looking at the feedback from like reviewers and playtesters which have played that game, one of the core issues that they had with that game was that there was just too much randomness. Like you couldn't rely on drawing cards which you needed. And considering it was supposed to be a very strategic game, that was sort of like in the negative for that. Now, of course, every game has the problems. I'm not like sort of slating that game in particular. But that was sort of one of the issues which I wanted to fix with my game. And coming off the back of Langskip, where the whole idea was to sort of fix issues with coup, which didn't like and make a bluffing game without player elimination, I was very much in that mindset of like, okay, one of the ways to get some get a really good core for a game is to fix issues in popular games, like really good games like Sinjitsu, and put them into my game. So yeah, 55 cards. Now, if you didn't know, it's 14, not including the KO card, which brings it to 15, which you unlock like once you've gone through the meter game, which there aren't any meters in this game at all. So yeah, much less cards, and there are no repeats in the final version of the game. Still, 4 base fighters. I mean, now there's 6 base fighters, but for a long, long time there was going to be 4, and I thought I needed to add some more value to this game because the gimmick of the gimmick of game being that the box turns into an arcade cabinet, it drove up the price quite a bit. But adding cards and adding content into the game is actually something which costs like the least when it comes to the actual game. The components usually is what drives games up. So I thought, oh, I can like make it a bit more value for money by adding in 2 additional fighters. But yeah, we got the 4 base characters here. I'm pretty sure Rushdown... It's weird now because Rushdown has been yellow for so long, but Rushdown was blue and Stance was yellow in this version of the game, which is just crazy. But as we can see here as well, every single card seems to be red, which is interesting. I think that means that... Yeah, I think what that means is that every single deck was going to be the same at one point. It wasn't going to be asymmetric at all, which is really, really interesting. So these aren't even Grappler, Zoner, Rushdown, and Stance. These are just 4 different fighters. But yeah, so we got the pawns, we got the deck. These are the health tokens, which are just red marbles. And these are the shield tokens, which... honestly, are quite representative of what I wanted the shields to be to begin with. I wanted them to very much be like Smash Bros. Style bubble. So it's cool that they actually kind of look like that. That might be something which I'll change in the final version of the actual game at some point. Now moving on to the board. 4 fighters on the board at once. This game was originally going to be a 1 to 4 player game, where there'd be 4 fighters on the board at one point. It's going to be very, very Smash Bros. As you can see as well, it was a platformer. It was a platform fighting game, so you could actually go up onto these platforms and do damage from above. I remember that being really, really bad early on, and also the stage is, I think, 4 spaces larger, obviously to cater to the 4-player experience. But yeah, as you can see, very, very early, very, very preliminary. Some stuff which stayed the same was the fact that orientations of fighters are really, really important. From these cards, I assume that we got attack 1 up, plus knockback because of the platform. I'd move 1 back, attack 1 forward. Like the orientation of fighters being a core mechanic has kind of always been there. But yeah, this is the first version of the game. I'm glad to see that it's changed so much, to be honest. Right, so going to do a quick jump now to version 15 of the game. So very big jump from 1 to 15, but looking through them, they all seem to be relatively similar with just like small improvements and changes. Straight away, the board is the same, but at this point, from what I remember, we are not using the platforms at all. I just haven't changed the board yet, so the same graphic, and I've just scribbled out 2 of the end pieces there. Let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. So that is correct. That's the amount of spaces which are going to be in the final version of the game. As you can see as well, some art has started to creep into the game. We got the card back for the Zoner here. And we've actually got some iconography here. This is just early on. Just playing around with different iconography. If people played this game at UK Games Expo last year, this is what the cards look like. So that was however long ago, like 7 months ago, 6 months ago, something like that. So it's still quite a while ago. But yeah, so in terms of the actual cards, they've changed a bit from the first version. You've got more room for text. Everything seems to be a lot more simpler. And also, every fighter has a unique deck. But you can see here, there are a lot of fighters. And this was at the phase where I was really trying to create as many fighters as possible to see what systems broke in the game. Like, I wanted to know what didn't work. Like, for example, I had a fighter which was a big body, which took over 2 spaces. And I'm like, okay, does that break the game in any way? The fact that it goes over 2 spaces. Got a fighter here which relies on dice, which isn't in the version of Fatal Knockout at the moment. There are dice in the final version of Fatal Knockout, but that is strictly for solo mode. This guy was a teleporter, if I remember rightly. This guy was a glass cannon, so just had loads of attack, and I'm pretty sure had actual health reduction, which all the fighters in Fatal Knockout have the exact same health. This one was a puppeteer clone character, which is interesting because I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I will say that actually does have some influence on the game in some way, but I'm not going to go in about it too much. This is the... I didn't have player boards at the time, so I was just drawing on the board. This area here is particular for the stance fighter, where the token would be used to change stance. So got them on both sides, so if someone plays stance and they use that. This, I think, was the first version when we introduced the burn tokens. Remember how I said when talking about sort of like controlling the randomness a bit earlier on in the video. To improve that even more, I decided, okay, players get the opportunity to burn twice in the game, where they can discard as many cards as they want from their hand and redraw that many. So if they got 3, they discard 3 and draw 3 back. Well, if they want to, anyway, they could also just discard 1 out of those 3 cards. Now you can do that in the final version of the game. You can do that 3 times. Most players don't use all 3 burns, but I just thought might as well give them as much control as possible, because there are negatives to burning as well. But if you're really searching for a particular card and you know your deck well enough to think that, okay, this card is coming up in 3 or 4 cards, I need to get to it early, then I thought it'd be good to reward the player with that knowledge and also give them that control. But yeah, that's really the main changes. Got these additional fighters here. Cards are more cleaned up, and there's a sort of inkling here of like, okay, I'm starting to introduce iconography into the game. Okay, so not jumping too far ahead, as you can still see we've got all these old fighters here, but now we have sort of the first art pass of the game, where I'm starting to like bring the look together, making sure that everything sort of works well, all the iconographies into the game. And this is only version 18, so only 3 versions, so like we're starting to make sort of big leaps here in development now. Each fighter has their own actual standee. The artwork is done for the 4 core fighters, which was the aim before the initial prototypes were made to take to UK Games Expo. So this would have been just before going to UK Games Expo last year. And on top of that, I thought I'd introduce guidebooks as well, which honestly look almost exactly the same as they do in the final version of the game. This was something which I love from games like, you know, Disney and Marvel Villainous, is the fact that one way to, if you want to, learn about your character which you are playing as, one way to do that is to read through a like little 3-4 page guidebook, give you more information about the fighter, but also it's another point of call to sort of clear up any additional rules, or just to give the player an easy way to flick through and find any sort of answers to questions that they had. Because with the way that Fatal Knockout is set up, there are a lot of like conditional rules, which is something which I usually steer away from. But with this game, it kind of required it in order to give it as much depth as it needed. And so the way it's sort of structured is that the first point of call for learning rules is the rulebook, and then the sub sort of point of call with that is the subset of it is the frequently asked questions page in the rulebook. And then you have your reference cards, which come with each fighter, and then finally you have your guidebook. And if there's a question which needs answering, it'll be in there at some point. But you know, that's the way it's sort of structured. It'll be in all 3 places, just in different forms. Like obviously the reference card is a lot more simpler, just sort of remind you. But the most detail is obviously going to be in the rulebook. But yeah, so you got these player mats here, which are very, very basic compared to the final version of the player mats. But this is what the player mats look like. Spots for 5 health and 2 burn tokens, and you have your decks here. Health tokens are now how they're supposed to look. Burn tokens are still not perfect. They're just like basic tabletop simulator tokens. And then you have the shield token here. But other than that, that's really the only changes, just changes to the appearance of the game. Right, okay, so now we're onto a version where there are 2 new key mechanics added into the game, as well as 1 slight change to 1 mechanic. And also, as we'll be able to see, a quick visual overhaul of one of the characters as well. So, just to clarify, all the things on the left here are all fighters which either haven't made it into the game or are very, very different now. This was just like sort of playing around with different fighters, but maintaining the art style. So I'd like reuse things such as the dummy fighter, which is the AI fighter. And I would like reuse things like, you know, I'd recolor the grappler to be purple and blue to like play with the idea of a teleport character. And this is like an older version of the rulebook as well. As you can see, space for graphics, so we didn't have a graphic at that time. So 2 key things which are obvious to see off the bat are the fact that there is now a meter track, and there is a pocket. So I'll talk about the pocket first, because we just talked about burning. So basically, another way which I wanted to add strategy and control to the game was that I wanted to allow players, when they burn cards, to put it into their pocket, which means that when they next draw cards, they can choose to draw from their pocket as well as the draw pile. So say they got one card in their pocket because they burnt cards to their pocket, then they can draw from the pocket and then draw 2 more cards from the draw pile, say if they don't have any cards in their hand. However, if you choose to burn a card whilst you already have a card in your pocket, then the pocketed card will go to the discard pile, and then the card you just burnt will go to the pocket. Second thing, like I said, is the meter gain. So as you can see here at the top of the cards, there is a little green symbol here. In the prototype version of the game, the cubes are actually green, which is good because at the moment they're red. But yeah, so basically, if you play this card and then when it activates during the fighting phase, your token would go up 1 on the meter track, and whenever you got to a part of the meter track where there would be a symbol above, you would, for example here, gain a burn token back, or for example gain a shield, and then when you get to the end, you would gain your KO card, which is the third mechanic, which is cool, which is just a very, very powerful, really early initiative card. So it's not the earliest initiative card. For example, if you've got a 0, 1, or a 2 initiative card, then that would still play before this one, which means that you can still get out of really powerful cards such as the ultimate, like the KO card. But for example, this one could do a potential of 4 damage when fighters only have 5 health, which is insane. However, it has no movement capabilities, which means that the opponent will have to be right next to you in order for this to activate. So you need to have great positioning, great planning, and your opponent needs to have a card which doesn't allow them to move, or doesn't have a card which is lower initiative than this one. So so they're very, very conditional, but incredibly powerful if they work out. And then finally, an additional slot for a burn token. So now you can burn 3 times. So those are sort of the big final changes which I made to the gameplay with this game. After this, now it is just the introduction of new fighters. What I will say actually is there are some additional rules which are added to the game just based off playtesting with people which are very into fighting games. One of the things which hopefully if you're into fighting games as well you will appreciate is the fact that we have now made being in the corner a disadvantage, because in a lot of fighting games that is the case where you're in the corner up against a wall, which is what is the case with this game. You're at a disadvantage. So for example, if the rushdown was to do an attack with a knockback, which would force you, if say for example, if you're both here, it would force you to go back 1 space. If you're already against the wall and you get pushed back, either with like a push or a knockback, then you would take an additional damage. So pushers don't do any damage. So if you got pushed from this perspective, from this angle here, you would get 1 damage, even though the push doesn't actually do any damage because you're up against the wall. But if you get knocked back, which does do 1 damage, then you would actually take a total of 2 damage. So being in the corner is not the most advantageous, definitely not. And say if we swapped it out here and we had the Zona has an interesting mechanic where they sometimes have ranged attacks which would, if you could, it would go off the stage. So they would have like a card which says, throw your javelin 4 spaces away. But to make the corner even more disadvantageous, the rule is if it was to go off stage, it would land and do damage at the edge of the stage on the last space. So again, it would do more damage here. So the Zona, if they were a bit close, could still do damage to you. So that was one of the more nuanced mechanical changes which were made to the game around this time. And so yeah, that's about it. There are 2 additional fighters which you haven't seen in this video, but one of them is the Gunslinger, in which I did a specific video on, and the other one is not being revealed until the launch day of the Kickstarter. So I'm not actually going to go into Tabletop Simulator and show you them, just because, you know, that will spoil the surprise. But they are an incredible fighter. They have an incredible look. They're very, very powerful and quite complex as well. And I just kind of want to save that reveal until the Kickstarter launches, which I think will be very, very cool. If you do want to get a sneak peek, there is a Tabletop Simulator version available of this game where it's all up to date with the 6 fighters. And if you want to go and do that, you can. But if you don't and you want to like keep it a surprise, then you can do. So you're going to have to wait until the launch. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm very, very excited for this game. It's cool to see all the different versions. I mean, even the versions which I didn't show you, which were just minor changes. It was just really cool to see sort of the progress of the game from start to finish. But yeah, so that's going to be it. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this was interesting for you guys. And yeah, I shall see you in the next one. Goodbye.